We continue now at the top of Daf Tesam at Aleph and Mesechet Shekalim. This is Shekalim Daf 9a. The Gemara in the previous Amud identified the lug as a particular old measurement of tzipore. So the Gemara now, we're going to skip this first line, the Gemara takes it out, and the Gemara now asks, V'loma kari le'atika, why is this called the old measurement? What's the reason it's referred to as being old? And so the Gemara answers, min begin. The reason is as follows, because dahave biyome ze'ira. Again, the Gemara takes out some of the words, because a long time ago it was a smaller measurement. Virabsa, then the measurement became a little larger, and then vi'izira, then it became small, kamadahavis, like it was before. So therefore, what we do is we're referring it to as the old one, so you shouldn't get confused. You shouldn't think it's the larger amount. You're going to realize it's the smaller amount. And the Gemara continues, Kamahu shiur shel kos. When it comes to the arba kosas on Pesach, how large is the actual cup? So Rav Yossi b'shem Rav Yossi ben Pazi, Rav Yossi bar Bivi b'shem Rav Shmuel. Rabbi Yossi says in the name of Rabbi Yossi ben Pazi, and Rabbi Yossi bar Bivi says in the name of Rav Shmuel, etzba'ayim al etzba'ayim, it's 2 finger breadths by 2 finger breadths, al rum etzba umechza ushlish etzba, and the height of the cup is going to be a finger breadth, and a half a finger breadth, and 1/3 of a finger breadth. The Gemara continues, Tani, it was taught, Yovesh Kezayis. Let's say you have wine, and the wine congealed, so now it's dried out. What's the shear in terms of the hotzah on Shabbos, in terms of the chiyuv for carrying on Shabbos? How large does it have to be? So it has to be a Kezayis. Divrei Rabbi Nosson, that's the opinion of Rabbi Nosson. The idea here is that when it's liquid, a revius, when that dries up, it actually turns into a Kezayis. Those are the same shiurim. And the Gemara continues, Rabbanan de Kesari, Rabbi Yossi bar Bivi b'shem Shmuel, the Rabbanan of Kesari and also Rabbi Yossi bar Bivi in the name of Shmuel, they say as follows, Asya de Rabbi Nosson Rabbi Shimon. They say that Rabbi Nosson follows the opinion of Rabbi Shimon. Kimad Rabbi Shimon Amar b'Revius, Kein Amar Rabbi Nosson b'Revius. Just like Rabbi Shimon holds by a Revius, again, when it dries out, it turns into a Kezayis. That's exactly what Rabbi Nosson holds by a Revius. When it congeals, it turns into the shear of a Kezayis. The Gemara continues, Rabbi Simon b'shem Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi. Rabbi Simon says in the name of Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi, Maisa b'pirdas Rabbi. There was a story with the mule of Rabbi, Shemesa, that it died, v'tiaru es dama mishum nevela, and they said that the blood was pure in terms of tumas nevela. It had no tuma. V'shal Rabbi Eliezer asked Rabbi Simon, and Rabbi Eliezer asked Rabbi Simon, Ad kama, how much blood are you going to say is tahor? V'lo ashkach be, he had no answer for him. V'shal Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi, so then he asked the same question to Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi. V'yomar lei, and he said to him, Ad revius tahor. If it's until a revius, it's going to be tahor, it's going to be pure. Yoser mi revius, but if there's more than a revius of blood, tamei, then it's going to be tamei. And the Gemara says, Rabbi Eliezer was angry at Rabbi Simon that he did not give him an answer to the question, that he didn't know the answer to this particular question. And the Gemara continues, Rav Bevi have a Yosef Masni Hodein Uvda. Rav Bevi was sitting and he said over this exact sugya again. He said over that the blood from a nevela is going to be tahor. So Amar le Rabbi Yitzchak bar Kahana. So Rabbi Yitzchak bar Kahana said to him, Ad revius tahor yosem mikan tamei. Are you saying it's only tahor until a revius, but once it's more than a revius, it's going to be tamei? Uvat be. When he heard this question, he kicked him. So Amar le Rabbi Zreika. So Rabbi Zreika said to him, Begin to shoylach atbod be. Just because he asks you a question, you kick him. Why are you kicking him for this reason? Amar le. So he said to him, Begin to lo have a daiti bi boitna be. The reason why I kicked him was because my mind wasn't settled. Why wasn't my mind settled? The Amar Rabbi Chanan, because Rabbi Chanan said, V'hayu chayecha teluim l'cha mineged. This is a pasuk by the Tochacha. It says your life is going to be hanging in front of you like by a thread. Zeh shelokei achitim l'shana. This is a person who has to buy his wheat for the year. He never knows if he's going to have wheat available, so he's always going to be worried. Ufacharta laila v'yomim. What does it mean you're going to be afraid night and day? Zeh lokech min hasidki. That's somebody who buys from the sidki. That's somebody who buys a little bit of wheat at a time. V'lo samin b'chayecha. You're not going to believe in your own life. You're not going to trust. Zeh lokech min hapalter. Again, somebody who buys from the baker. Somebody, again, the idea is not sure if he's going to have food on the table. And the Gemara says, V'ana samichna palter. So he says, that's true by me as well. Reb Bevi says, I rely on the palter, and that's why I'm nervous. I'm always worried about parnasa. Since I was nervous, I was worried. I ended up kicking him. And so the Gemara asks, Umau kedon. So what is the halacha l'maisa? What is the halacha with the blood from a nevela? Is it tamei, tumas nevela or not? Gemara says, hey, Rabbi Yoshua ben Pesora. Rabbi Yoshua ben Pesora testified, al dam nevela shehu tahor. That when it comes to dam nevela, it is totally pure. The Gemara says, Mahu tar milahachshir. Maybe what it means is it's tar in terms of being machshir. In other words, the blood is not going to be machshir food. It won't prepare food to receive tumah. Avolatamos metame. But maybe in terms of tumah, it is tameh. How do you know what it means that it's tar over here? It could be talking about hechshir. So the Gemara says, no, Taman Taninan, we learned over there in a Mishnah, Dam Hasheretz Kivisaro. It says that the blood of a sheretz, so that blood is considered the same as its flesh. Metame ve'eno machshir. The halacha is that it's metame, but it's not machshir. Ve'ein lanu kayotze bo, and there's nothing similar. In other words, only the dam hasheretz we make a distinction and say it's metame ve'eno machshir. But when it comes to other items, if it's not machshir, it's also going to be tar as well. So you cannot say that Rabbi Yoshua ben Pesora meant that it's tameh, but it's not machshir. It's not machshir. It's also not tameh. It's going to be completely pure in that situation. But the Gemara now says that might not be the explanation of this Mishnah. In other words, when the Mishnah says ve'ein lanu kayotze bo, that other bloods are not like the blood of the sheretz, it might not be referring to the idea of metame ve'eno machshir. It's not referring to that at all. It could very well be that by other bloods as well, by dam nevela as well, they are metame, they're not machshir. Same as the dam hasheretz. But what it really means is v'shiur tumaso shadama metame kivisar. What it might mean, what the Mishnah might mean, is that the shiur, the measurement, the amount that is tameh, is not the same by sheretz as it is by other areas. In other words, by dam hasheretz, the halacha is that even a tiny amount of flesh is metame, and likewise, even a tiny amount of blood is metame. And maybe what the Mishnah means, the Gemara is saying you can't say one way or the other, maybe what the Mishnah means is, ein lano kayotze bo, there's nothing else that's similar to sheretz in this regard. Meaning, in the fact that, just like the flesh, so too the blood, they're both metame at very small amounts. That might not be true by other areas of halacha, like dam nevela, for example. The Gemara ends up saying, what is the halacha? Amar Rabbi Yossi. Rabbi Yossi says, pligi bat shrein amoroin. Halacha l'maisa tzemachlokas amoroim. Chad amar tameh v'chad amar tahor. One of them says, again, that the dam nevela is tameh. The other one says that the dam nevela is tar. And the mashmos is any amount, even more than a revius, dam nevela is going to be tahor. Manda amar tameh ke Rabbi Yehuda. The Gemara says the one who says tameh follows the position of Rabbi Yehuda. That's going to be explained in a moment. Manda amar tar, the one who says tar ke Rabbi Yoshua ben Pesora, that follows Rabbi Yoshua ben Pesora, which is exactly the Rabbi Yoshua ben Pesora we quoted before. Now the Gemara says, Amar le Rav Avduma demin nechusa v'yos. Rav Avduma from Nechusa said, this is correct to say that if you hold Tameh, that follows the position of Rabbi Yehuda. To Rabbi Yehuda, Moraino devei nesiya have. Because Rabbi Yehuda, he was somebody who was by Rebbe. And again, the original story we had was with Rebbe. It was Rebbe's mule that we had the original halacha. Therefore, it makes sense to say that Rabbi Yehuda would be the one to say that dam nevela is Tameh. And we'll also point out over here, besides the fact that Rabbi Yehuda was Moraino devei nesiya, besides the fact that he was the one who was Mora Horos, who taught rulings in the house of the Nasi, in the house of Rebbe, also Rabbi Yehuda is the one in Mesechet Edius who brings down that this is actually a machlokas Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel when it comes to dam nevela, and it's actually Beis Hillel who say Tameh, and that's why again it makes sense that Rabbi Yehuda would say Tameh in this particular case. And the Gemara continues at the Tudat, Shema Yayani v'Yomru v'Chulu. The Mishnah said that they wouldn't enter the Lishka wearing certain kinds of garments because maybe people would suspect them of stealing money, of stealing machatz shekel from the Lishka by hiding it in these kind of garments. So the Gemara says, Tani Rabbi Yishmael taught, Kavutz lo yisram. Somebody who has a lot of hair shouldn't be the one to go into the Lishka to take the money. Again, because the person's going to be a suspect that he hid the money inside his hair, that he's stealing the money. The Gemara says, Tani was taught, HaGizborin hayu mefasfasin bekilkin, that the Gizborin, the people who took care in the Beis HaMikdash, they would actually smooth out their hair so you wouldn't have it stuck together again in a way where it would be easy to hide the money. That way they wouldn't be suspect of stealing the money. Tani, it was taught, Medabrin hayu imo, to the person who would go into the Lishka, they would speak with him, Misha shehu nichnas ad shah shehu yotze, from the time he went into the Lishka till the time he went out of the Lishka, in order that he'd be talking, he wouldn't be able to sneak money into his mouth. So the Gemara says, V'yamale pume mavi, why not just fill his mouth with water? Give him some water, now he won't be able to open his mouth and steal the money. The Gemara says, Amar Rab Tanchuma says, Memnei ha-bracha, when you did the Trumas HaLishka, you'd actually make a bracha. So he couldn't have water in his mouth because he'd have to have his mouth available to make the bracha on separating the machatz shekel. The Gemara says, Rabbi Shmuel bar Nachman b'shem Rabbi Yonasan. Rabbi Shmuel Bar Nachman says in the name of Rabbi Yonasan, B'Torah, U'v'Neviim, U'v'Chsuvim, we find in the Torah, we find in the Navi, and we find in the Ksuvim, Matzanu, Sha'adam, Tzarech, Latzes, Yidei HaBrius. We find that a person needs to conduct himself in a manner where people do not suspect him, in the same way that you conduct yourself in a manner where God does not suspect the person. B'Torah minayin, where do we find this in the Torah? Because the pasuk says, "Ve'yisem nikiyim me'Hashem u'miyisrael." You need to be innocent both from God and from Klal Yisrael. B'Neviim minayin, where do we find it in the Navi? Because it says, "Kel Elokim Hashem v'Gomer." This is talking about where Reuven and Gad, the rest of Klal Yisrael, suspect them of building a mizbeach for purposes that are inappropriate. So again, it says no. They say that we believe in Hashem, and this was not done as a form, as some kind of form of avodah zarah. V'Yisrael hu yada, that's the conclusion of that pasuk in the Navi. B'chsuvim inayin, and where we find it in the Ksuvim, t'chsiv, like the pasuk says, u'matzah chen v'seichel tov, b'eino Elokim v'Adam. Again, all of these pasukim mention God and mention Klal Yisrael, or in this case, mention Elokim and Adam. In other words, we have to be innocent both in the eyes of God and in the eyes of man. Gemara concludes, Gamliel Zuga Shal Rabbi Yossi Bar Rabbi Bon. Gamliel Zuga, that was his name, he asked Rabbi Yossi Bar Rabbi Bon, Ezu HaMechuver Shebekulam, which pasuk is the most ideal to quote for this principle? Amar Lei said to him, V'yisem Nikiyim Me Hashem Yisrael, quote the one from the Torah, V'yisem Nikiyim Me Hashem Yisrael. Again, you have to be innocent from Hashem and from Klal Yisrael. And the Gemara continues with the Mishnah, Shal Beis Rabbi Gamliel Hoyenichnas V'shiklo Bein Etzba'osav. In the house of Rabbi Gamliel, they would come into the Beis HaMikdash, and they would have the shekel between his fingers, V'zarku Lifnei HaTorim, and he would throw the money in front of the person taking the money for the karbanos. And the person who would be taking the money would have kavanah, would have intention, and he would push it into the box again that was used eventually to bring the karbanos. Now there's a machlokas exactly what the Mishnah means. It's clear that Rabbi Gamliel wanted to make sure that his money that he was giving was used for the karbanos. That was his intention. He was trying to make sure that the money that he gave ended up in the kupos, ended up in the boxes for the purpose of the public karbanos. The question is, what was the kavan of the person taking the money from Rabbi Gamliel? Was that person trying to do what Rabbi Gamliel wanted and take the money and use it and make sure that it was used, it was earmarked for the karbanos? Or some say the contrary. Some say that everybody had to have an even chance of their money being used for the karbanos. So on the contrary, the person taking the money would not have kavanah specifically to use Rabbi Gamliel's money for the karbanos. He'd have kavanah to treat all the money equally. That's a machlokas, exactly what the Mishnah means. And the Mishnah continues, Ein hatorem torem adshu omer lahem esram. The person who took the money, who did the trumas halishka, who took the money from the lishka, he wouldn't do it until he asked the people outside, the guards, should I do it? V'hein omrim lo terom shalosh pamim. They would tell him do it. They would say this happened 3 times. He would ask 3 times, and they would answer each time that you should do it. Torah Meserishona, the first time he did it, which was around Pesach time, when he took the first amount of money from the Lishka, they would take that money, v'chipa b'katablios, and then they would take this kind of leather, this kind of hide, and they would cover over the rest of the money so they would know that that was the leftover from the first amount of money that they withdrew. Hashniya v'chipa b'katablios. Same thing the second time. Whatever money was remaining, they would cover it up. Hashlishis lo hayim mechape. But on the third time, they didn't bother covering up because there was going to be no more opportunity anyhow to take, so they didn't have to show what was shirayim, what was left over, and what new money was brought in. The idea over here is they would cover whatever money was remaining, and then when people would come, because people would come throughout the year to give Mesechet Shekel, they would put their money on top of that katablios. So then you would know that this was new money that arrived and not leftover from that which was withdrawn the first time. The Mishnah explains, why did they cover over the money that was left over? Because we're afraid a person might forget the second time around, when he comes around Shavuos time, around Sukkot time, and he's going to take money from that which was left over, which you're not supposed to do. The money that's left over is not supposed to be withdrawn for the karbanos. You're supposed to take from the new money that's deposited. And the Gemara continues, the Mishnah continues, Torah Masrishon l'shem Eretz Yisrael. The first time they withdrew the money, they did that for the sake of all people in Eretz Yisrael who donated the Mesechet Shekel. V'ashniya l'shem krochim hamukafin law. Then from the second time, it was for the cities that kind of surrounded that area, a little more outwards from the direct cities in Eretz Yisrael. V'ashlishis l'shem bavel, l'shem madai, l'shem. And the third time, then they took it, and they had in mind the people who donated Mesechet Shekel from faraway places, like Bavel, like Madai, etc. We'll continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Tes Amud Beis.